Hey, good evening. Welcome to episode 56 of the Thrifty Marketer Talks. Apologies for the slight delay. I was waiting for my guest to join me. You might be thinking why it's Tuesday. It's not Thrifty Marketer Talks time, but I have holidays on Thursday, this Thursday, so I moved it to Tuesday, and I have an amazing guest, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to have a chat with him. Right. We last week we spoke about personal development kind of topic. So this episode also we are continuing with the same. Negative thinking and negative thoughts is something we all struggle with, right? So I wanted to get somebody on the show who has done a tremendous amount of work in that area, have broke the pattern, etc. So today I have Brian Sachetta, who is the owner of Get Out of Your Head book as well as a movement. So he will be talking about breaking free from negative thoughts, learning to stop overthinking. I do a lot of overthinking. People who know me know that I do a lot of overthinking. I take a lot of problems which are not problems, my problems. So Brian is an author and owner of Get Out of Your Head, a brand and a book series that seeks to help folks overcome anxiety and depression. We all know since the pandemic kicked in, the focus on mental health of employees across companies, on personal level as well, it has got into a lot of attention. By trade, Brian is a software developer. He combines his experience in the tech world with previous mental health battles to draw parallels between computer systems and the human mind and give readers practical strategies for evading their own psychological demons. Brian currently has two books on the market: Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety, and Get Out of Your Head Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression. His mission is to help as many sufferers as possible through not only those books, but also with his blog and podcast appearances. So, I am grateful that he agreed to come on the show and speak about the topic. Without further delay, let me bring him on. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Vivek. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. The slight delay, these delays give me panic, when the guest takes a bit of a time to join, because one day I was waiting for a guest and she didn't turn up. So it was such an embarrassing, I went live. So this time I just hold on to it. I was like, fingers crossed. And I'm so glad to see you. How are you doing otherwise? You said you're traveling. Where are you traveling to, etc., etc.?
I was skiing this weekend, so I was coming back home from that, and the weather conditions were not great, so it was a little bit of slow driving and trying to stay safe. But I am back home and I am good, so thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, for agreeing to come on the show and talk about this topic, which is pretty difficult for people to even discuss openly. So you have your own journey in this area. You have come out of it. You now help others do it. So, which is fantastic. So, I have curated a set of questions based on the topic. If you're ready, we can start off.
That sounds great.
Absolutely. So, let's start with negative thoughts and overthinking. So, Brian, tell me, how can we even identify negative thoughts? People sometimes may not think that they're thinking negatively. It's been a practice for several years. So how can we identify negative thoughts and patterns of overthinking in our own minds?
Definitely. I think sort of the key word that I want to hone in on here is mindfulness. And I also want to emphasize the point that, in the self-help world, there's a lot of terms that get boiled down and thrown at our faces and sort of like dressed up and wrapped up nicely and whatnot, right? Where it's like, right. Oh, identify negative thoughts this quickly and like vanquish all anxiety in an instant or something like that. It's like,
right.
I think if you come across a lot of my content, if you read my blogs, my books, stuff like that, you'll see that like, I don't sugarcoat things. I don't, dress things up. I like to say that it's a no BS approach, right? It's like, I'll give it to you straight. The reason why I say that right now is the fact that like identifying negative thinking can take some time, right? It's not like I'm sitting at my desk and I magically have this epiphany that I am dealing with anxiety and these are my negative thoughts and these are my positive ones or something like that. This is a journey, right? Where it's like a lot of the times what happens is somebody has negative emotions that without even them realizing it, they are perpetuating in their own mind. And after a certain amount of pain, right? It's like one day they wake up or they are living their life and they're saying, wow, whatever this is that is occurring is so painful that it needs to stop. And that is sort of the entry point into the journey for each individual person towards healing, right? So when it comes to identifying negative thoughts, it's more like we almost need to have experience with negative thoughts for some amount of time. You know, it could be on the short end, but most likely it will be a few months, a few years, something like that. Eventually, we will say to ourselves, oh, wait a second, I have so much input, like in terms of how many thoughts that I've generated, negative thoughts, right? I have so much experience, and I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about any person, right? They will say this to themselves of, I have a lot of experience here in knowing that, okay, I see these certain kinds of thoughts in my mind, and I'm starting to develop or see a pattern here. It's like when I think X, I feel Y. And so why I wanted to talk about mindfulness with this answer is mindfulness is basically sort of like bringing a sense of awareness, a sense of understanding to our daily lives and being able to identify these patterns and also say, oh, I am understanding that I am doing this certain thing and it's leading to this specific outcome. And so after a certain amount of time, I think we're sort of predisposed or, sort of wired to come up with these conclusions and say, oh, wait a second. I have thought this kind of thought so many times in the past. I'm thinking it right now, and I'm feeling the same way I thought all those other times. It's that becomes the epiphany of being like, wait a minute, I now realize that I need to stop these certain kinds of thoughts because I don't want to feel these particular kinds of ways again in the future.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a classic example for that, that kind of living, because you are used to those thoughts. You never sit back and think whether they are good for you or bad. And I reached a point where, I started getting anxiety attacks exactly at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I was living alone from my family. That's when I started paying attention to the thoughts and mindfulness practices and things like that. And it has helped me become much better. At least I'm sleeping well, I'm eating well, I'm thinking clearly. So all those things. So yeah, we will get into more details, but I love the way you have put it across. The first, how to identify the negative thoughts. Okay. So let's get into a little bit into details of that. Like, what are some of the common causes of negative thoughts and overthinking, according to you?
Sure. And I do just want to say, sorry to hear that, you have gone through those episodes in the morning. Glad to hear that it's starting to get a little bit better. But I think the sort of, I don't know, the human in me can't hear those stories and not address them. Right. So glad to hear that they're starting to go a little bit better. So the question, just to repeat it, I believe was, causes of negative thoughts, right?
Yes.
So this is another one of those questions, right, where it's like, I will give the real answer. I will not dress this up or anything like that. Right. And I think it's important to state this answer because it eventually will show you that, like, there's nothing wrong with us. This is sort of the way that we are wired, right? Correct. So if you think about human psychology and evolution and the way that we survived over time, our species, right? Right. So one of the theories in this circle is that over time, right, or I guess just the theory of evolution, and we'll apply it to our psychology. So theory of evolution and natural selection and whatnot, right, is that traits and genetics and behaviors and whatnot that sort of promoted our survival over time were more likely to subsist in the gene pool and then live on throughout generations, right? So, for example, if there was a tribe of folks that was fast, right, they could run quickly, and then there was another tribe that was slower. Let's just say both of those tribes were regularly facing tigers out in the wild, right? It's
Right.
not hard to see that the faster tribe would likely live longer than the slower tribe because the tigers are going to get to the slower ones faster, right? And I think that's a pretty common example from
Yeah.
textbooks and whatnot in terms of survival of the fittest and all that.
Right.
If you apply that same kind of notion to our psychology, our psychological lives, our minds, whatever you want to call it, essentially, right? Like, and it's along the same lines is, in order to run away from a threat, we first need to be able to detect that threat is real and is actually a substantial threat in front of us, right? So it's like, if we see a tiger and we're like, oh, that's a cute little cat, like nothing wrong with that, and then it eats us, that obviously doesn't help promote our survival. And I understand that there's, depending on the type of prey that's in front of you, right? Like sometimes they say if there's a bear in front of you, maybe you want to, play dead or be quiet or whatever. But we still need to have some sort of mechanism in our minds that says that is a threat and you need to address it immediately. And so going on the natural selection evolution kind of line of thinking, it's basically it's similar to the case that I presented a second ago, which is basically the faster that we can identify those threats. And what that basically means is the faster that our bodies can rev up their sort of fight or flight response, the quicker we will be able to evade those kinds of threats. And so if we take that line of thinking even further, all the way out into, modern society, right? When we say, what are some of the causes of negative thinking? A lot of the base case or the main place that those thoughts emanate from is sort of this notion of like a negativity bias. And that is right along the same lines of being able to respond to threats, identify threats, that sort of thing. So the negativity bias is this notion that they talk about a lot in psychology, which is basically our brains are hardwired to look at and consider things that could scare us, could threaten our survival, kill us, before we think about, consider, stew on things that could make us happy, joyous, something like that. So why I like to give this long ramble about the negativity, the brain's negativity bias is a lot of people will say like, I'm having all these negative thoughts. I need to stop them. Like, it might be my own doing or something like that. Sure, it could be. But a large source of negative thoughts comes from the fact that we exist, that we are humans, and we are constantly in this state of fight or flight in a scary and uncertain world, right? So I think we need to give ourselves some credit sometimes to be able to say like, hey, this isn't necessarily my doing. This is the product of the environment that I live in. Once we're able to make that distinction, we can, like, just being able to say that to ourselves, right? It's almost this reassuring thought. And that allows us to turn off some of, some of the other negative emotions we get alongside that come alongside us saying to ourselves like, oh, I'm thinking this way, I'm feeling this way, I shouldn't be thinking this way, I shouldn't be feeling this way. It's us saying to ourselves like, no, like I know it's not pleasant, but it's totally okay. And then it's sort of this counterintuitive thing where it's like, once you sort of allow the negative thoughts to be there, you neutralize them, and then you're able to look away from them more readily.
Got it. Yeah, actually, it's very common for people to say, label people as negative people, stay away from these kind of people, etc. But then there is the way you answered it. There's a lot many reasons that's beneath the surface why we all behave in certain way. So that's absolutely fantastic. Right. So let's move on to some practical strategies. So what are some of the practical strategies? Right. I know we are primed or we are programmed like this. So what are some practical ways I can or everybody can break free from these negative thinking or negative thoughts and overthinking, basically?
Yeah. So it's a good question. And I think one of the ways that I like to frame the answer to this question on a lot of different shows is by talking about my first book. So I will just restate that, and then we'll talk about like the specific details or parts of it. So that book is called Get Out of Your Head, A Toolkit for Living with and Overcoming Anxiety. The book is split into two parts, and I'll talk about why I want to talk about, one of those parts, right? So the first part is called Zooming In, which is basically looking at acutely anxiety-provoking situations or situations in which we are already feeling fearful, or things that are on our calendars over which we that are coming soon that we're going to be fearful about, right? The second part of the book is called Zooming Out, and it's more like taking a high-level approach and saying, how do we build lives that have less anxiety in them overall? So we're going to put that
Right.
second part of the book aside for now, and we're going to focus on the first part of the book. So in that first half, zooming out, I present a framework called the 10 steps to getting out of your head. Those steps are basically just like 10 simple actions, 10 simple tactics strategies you can enlist when you are feeling anxious already to sort of walk some of that fear back. So why don't we jump into a few of them? I have a few outlined here that I want to talk about quickly.
Absolutely.
And feel free to butt in if you have any questions or anything like that. So step one on this list, and it's going to sound kind of obvious. I like to say that this is sort of like a no S Sherlock sort of strategy, but it's so the step itself is just breathe, right? And I'll say, I like to preface this one sometimes because it's like, if you turn to somebody and you're like, hey, just breathe, man. Like sometimes there'll be this defensive reaction, right? Of like, look,
Right.
of course, of course I have to breathe, whatever, right? It's not a
Right.
blow your socks off, rocket science sort of strategy, but they're
Right.
just as like we've talked about some of the evolutionary psychology, the way our bodies are wired and that sort of thing. There's a lot of science behind this one.
Right.
Because I want to cover a couple steps here, I will go quickly on this one.
Sure.
But basically, so we've got our fight or flight mechanisms or the fight or flight response that lives within our body. That is called the sympathetic nervous system. There is also like a different division of our autonomic nervous system that gets us to calm down. That is called our parasympathetic nervous system. And so in order to get the parasympathetic nervous system to activate, we need to breathe deeply. Specifically, we need to breathe out deeply. Like we need to exhale deeply. But obviously, if you're not breathing much at all, right? If you're breathing shallowly in your chest and you're sort of doing one of those hyperventilating, like, right? You are not getting that full exhale out and you are not activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So when I say breathe, it is not meant to be curt or something like that or flippant. It is like, there is science here that says that like one of the most reliable ways to activate your parasympathetic nervous system is to exhale deeply. So we want to do that, right? And then once we feel a little bit more calm, all of those things that are going on inside our bodies when we're anxious, so the neurotransmitters, the heart racing, the blood pumping, those things will calm down. And I think a lot of us who experience anxiety, we will say that once those things taper off, we will feel better. And then the thoughts accompanying all those symptoms will sort of either mitigate or go away as well. So that's one strategy that I want to cover. Any questions on that one before I jump to the next one?
No, you can proceed. No worries.
Okay, cool. So the next one I'm going to jump into, and I don't cover this one a lot on podcasts, but I am trying to get in the habit of talking about new subjects. So forgive me if I stumble on this one a little bit. I don't have the script down entirely yet. But so this is step 6. And it is called stop questioning yourself. Now, obviously, like that's a vague notion, right? It's like stop questioning myself. I don't know exactly what that means. That's why we're going to talk about it, right? So a lot of the times when we have something that is upcoming, an event, let's just say we're going on a job interview next week, and the job interview is something that is important to us. It scares us, whatever.
Right.
Because it scares us, that means there's a lot, we perceive a lot of uncertainty surrounding that event. One of the ways that we sometimes try to gain certainty over something that scares us is by jumping into our heads and trying to rehearse that specific scenario, right? There are many reasons why we might do that, or we may have learned to do that. So let's just say one of them, right, is over the course of time, we've heard from parents and teachers and mentors and, sort of self-help gurus and stuff like that, that in order for something to make manifest in the real world, we need to first create it in our minds, right? We need to see ourselves doing and attaining what it is that we want before that thing can come to fruition in the real world. I would, in my writing, I like to call BS on that. I just don't think that is an accurate statement, right? And the example that I give is like, if you go to the gym and you are trying to set a personal record on the squat rack, right? Does every single person that has ever set a personal record see themselves getting up to the rack, having all the plates on the bar, doing the full squat, putting the weight back and then celebrating? I think the answer is no, right? So it's like, sure, that strategy for sort of seeing yourself doing what it is that you desire it could be helpful, right? And to some people it is helpful. But I think for those of us who deal with anxiety, it is actually another way into our heads and another way to perpetuate fear and a lot of our negative emotions.
Right.
So when kind of coming back to this step called, right, stop questioning yourself, when we are going into those ruminative cycles of trying to envision ourselves doing the things that we want to do, what we're really doing is we are questioning the outcome that is in front of us, right? If you knew with absolute certainty that you were going to lift, if you knew with absolute certainty you were going to step up to the squat rack and set that personal record, you probably wouldn't think about it at all, right? You'd just go about your day in the same fashion that it's like, I don't need to see myself brushing my teeth every night. I just, it's a subconscious routine at this point. I just know I can do it. Everybody knows they can do it, right? And they just do it. And so why I say it's important to stop questioning ourselves is because the more that we go into those rehearsal scenarios, again, the strategy could be like questioning or rehearsing could be helpful for some, but I think it's not for most. When we go into those scenarios, we are signaling to our brains and to our bodies that we don't know what the outcome is going to be. And when we send that subconscious message to our brains and to our bodies, what they pick up in turn is, oh my goodness, there's a lot of uncertainty here. There is potentially a threat here, right? Why would you be stewing on something if it didn't mean much to you? And so our brains take that message and say, we need to sound the proverbial alarms, because what you're telling us right now is that this situation, if handled improperly, could lead to bad outcomes. Right. And so when we stop doing those rehearsal behaviors, when we get out of our own heads, we then send the subconscious message to our brains to say, like, hey, everything's good here. Don't worry about this one. Like, and I don't mean that from a thinking perspective. I mean, like, the autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight system, right? It's like, you guys are good. Like power down the systems. You don't have to keep sounding those alarms for this one, right? So I'm going to move on to the last step that I want to talk about. But first, any questions on that one?
No, absolutely perfectly explained, actually.
Okay, cool. So I'm currently in the middle of a short edit of my first book, and I think the edit will be coming out later. Well, it will be coming out later this year. I just don't have an exact release date on it. So in the original, if you buy the book today, the step that I'm going to talk about is step 8. For the rewrite, I have shifted it up to step 7. So either way, the step that we're going to talk about is called Get Back to the Present Moment. One of the reasons I want to talk about this one is that I feel as though it transitions well from the step that we just talked about, right? So if you think about anxiety in general, for the most part, I'd say 99% of cases, something like that, they are a product of living off in the future, right? We are sitting in our rooms today, sitting at the office, thinking about what could happen one day, what might happen tomorrow, what negative thing awaits us, what scary thing awaits us a month from now, a year from now, something like that.
Right.
If we are able to put those thought patterns down and say, you know what, I'm not going to think about tomorrow for a second. I'm not going to worry about what next month is going to bring me. A lot of the time we can get ourselves out of anxiety. Obviously the challenging thing is that is also what I just mentioned is also sort of a vague notion, right? Where it's like, just stop thinking about tomorrow. It's just so abstract and nebulous that it's really hard to, it's hard to conceptualize and really do anything about. What I really am sort of getting at with this one is going back to the core ethos of the brand, right? It is, we can almost think of like being present is equal to not being in our heads. So if we are present, right, we are observing what is happening around us. We are engaging in activities this moment that keep us out of our minds, that keep us blissfully distracted, those sorts of things. The reason why I talk about this one in relation to the previous step that we talked about, right, is like, so sometimes when we are doing those rehearsal sessions that we talked about in step 6, and we're saying, oh, I'm really terrified of that job interview next week, something like that. Sometimes we then get to those events. And then the next thing we know, we're stepping out of the office, the interview's over, and our thinking mind comes back. And we're like, what the heck just even happened? I don't even, like, I almost blacked out. I don't even remember being there. I don't remember thinking about these things. I don't remember saying these things. And we don't actually black out, right? But what happens is we get so present in those events. We get out of our heads. We are sort of living in our hearts, so to speak, right? And it's a completely different experience than what we were envisioning in the weeks leading up to it when we were doing all that rehearsal. So the reason why I like to talk about these two steps, in tandem, is the fact that, like, if we are able to get ourselves to that sort of experience in relation with step 6, which is, stop questioning yourself, we can then sometimes say to ourselves, wow, I just had a true experience of presence. And I understand that the more I'm able to cultivate those sort of experiences, the less anxiety I'm going to have. And the reason why that's important, right, is like so many times with self-help and, anxiety, mental health, all that sort of stuff, we have these limiting beliefs. And we say to ourselves, for example, I don't think that I can perform well at this job interview. I am afraid of what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden, maybe, right, we get out of our heads, we have a sort of belief shifting experience. And now we have this evidence that it's like, we don't know what to do with this anymore, because if we were to truly believe that we are capable of what we just did, we wouldn't necessarily, like, if we really believed it, that sort of thought, that sort of belief does not, it doesn't bode well, right? It doesn't sit with our anxiety, our notion of saying, like, I have to rehearse this event. I don't think I'm capable of doing these things. And so when we have those experiences, we're starting to poke holes in our pre-existing limiting beliefs. And I know those, things like that, terms like that get thrown around a lot in the self-help world. But when it comes to anxiety, when you have those experiences, they are really profound, because then it's like, all of a sudden, I cannot logically hold on to those two beliefs at the same time. And eventually, with enough of those experiences, we will allow ourselves to be more present in the face of those things that scare us.
Absolutely. I just loved listening to those answers, because when you're talking about these tips, or maybe the maybe hacks, or whatever you want to call it, I can feel that it's been written or devised by somebody who has gone through something and found a real solution. It's not like the typical self-help mental health books you will read about. These are real things which you can do and see profound changes in your life. So people who are listening to this right now, or maybe when I put it up on my YouTube channel, my request is go to getoutofyourhead.com. Brian has a lot of amazing stuff up there. His book is up on Amazon. Get a copy, go through these tips, and find out which one is, where are you, and what tips will apply to your specific situation. So that is my recommendation at this point. All right. So moving on, I want to talk about reframing, right? For example, this is a term which a lot of experts talk about, a lot of people who do research on mental health talk about. So, how can we reframe our negative thoughts in a more positive light? Is there any tips from your side?
Yeah, this is a tough one to answer. I think in general, it's such a case by case basis, and it's also like, everybody has their own negative thoughts, and everybody has their own ways of dealing with them. In general, what we are talking about when we ask this question is sort of the broad notion of coping mechanisms, right? So how is it that we face negative thoughts and deal with them? How do we live in spite of them? How do we change them such that we feel fewer negative emotions when they come into our lives? It's a difficult question to answer, honestly.
Absolutely.
And I think, possibly, and I hate sometimes when I kind of lead the question in a different fashion, but I feel like I have to. I think I would say probably the better goal here would be to neutralize negative thoughts and then turn away from them. So a lot of the work that I do, a lot of my writing, you will see, involves or deals with distracting ourselves. And one of the reasons for that is, like, you eventually get to the point where you chew over negative thoughts so much that you realize that no matter how you look at them, no matter how you think about them or try to solve them or something like that, sure, you can neutralize them. You could use some coping mechanism to say like, hey, I'm feeling as though I'm not capable of this thing right now. You could reframe that and say, you know what? That is a product of my anxiety and my fear telling me that what is about to happen might not happen. When in reality, if I didn't feel fearful, that belief, the beliefs that I hold would not be tainted, would not be colored in the same fashion. And so if I can get myself thinking in a different light, if I can get myself feeling a little bit better, the weight that those negative thoughts have, they won't hold so much weight, right? So that's just one specific example of how we can do that sort of thing. But I guess going back to the distraction piece, right? It's like, because I'm trying to give like a specific example, right? But it's like, in my book, in my first book, I talk about these 3 tenets of anxiety. One of them is the fact that you cannot solve anxiety, right? It's like anxiety is sort of just an emotion, and you can't really solve or figure out emotions. You can really just like act on them and let them flow through you in some capacity. So it's like the more that we stew on negative thoughts, the more we focus on them, the more negative we're going to feel, right? So there's sort of 2 strategies there. One is, basically the question that you asked is like, how can we reframe them so they're not so negative? The other is, the one that I'm inserting into the conversation here, which is like, can we look away from them? And then by product of doing that, can we not experience so much of the negativity that comes alongside them? So the first piece is difficult. And that kind of the reason why I'm stumbling on this one a little bit is like, we all have our own ways of coping. We all have our own ways of reframing. And a lot of those like reframing tools have to do with our own personalities. When it comes to distracting, like it's easier to talk about that because it's a broad enough notion that we can say that like, no matter how it is that you distract yourself from the noise in your head, that's what you need to do to stop feeling so negative. Right. And so a lot of the 10 steps or a lot of the steps in the list of 10 steps to getting out of your head, they are one way or another involved in distraction, right? It's like that if you boil them down, they are all ways to get out of your head. And what does to get out of your head mean, right? To distract yourself from negative thoughts or to distract yourself from the voices in your mind. One of the things that I guess I like to talk about here as well is like, there is always the opportunity to sort of rehash negative thoughts, right? It's almost as if like, if you think about the way that a scab forms on our body, right? It's like, okay, so let's say we get a cut, that we could sort of equate that cut on our body to the physical form of a negative thought. Eventually, right? If we reframe that thought or our bodies have enough time to heal, a scab will form. And all of a sudden it's like, it's tough because I'm trying to keep 2 metaphors at the same time, but it's like that scab now is sort of it's not bleeding anymore, and the cut is not bleeding, and at the same time that negative thought is neutralized in our minds and it's not causing as much anguish. Now the difficulty, and this is why the distraction piece is so important, is like, if we wanted to at any point in time, we could go back over to the place where our cut exists and we could pick at that scab. It'll start bleeding again. It'll start pussing, all this sorts of stuff, right? So the difficulty with focusing on the negative thoughts and saying like, how do I reframe them into something positive is like, the more time that we spend with them, the more likely we are to pick the scab, so to speak, right? And to dive back into negativity spirals. And so it's like, I guess sort of once that scab forms, either, physically or metaphorically, it's like, the next thing to do is to stop picking at it and go look at something else. And how do we go look at something else? It's like we pull out our mental health toolkits and we figure out like which distraction technique is going to be most beneficial for us right now. I think the other thing that is important with the distraction piece is, if I said to you, hey, why don't you stop overthinking, right? Why don't you stop focusing on this negative thought? If I don't give you something else to do in place of that mental activity, it's like within a minute, you're going to go right back to it, right? So it's
absolutely,
sort of, people talk about the monkey mind in psychology, and it's basically like understanding that on some level we are animals, right? And we are, there are parts of our brains that are quote unquote dumb, right? And it's like, I know it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's like, just like with a baby, right? If a baby is crying, you give it a different toy. And so it's like for us, we need to give ourselves a different metaphorical toy. And that is usually some distraction technique. So it could be going for a walk. It could be listening to our favorite song, doing some jumping jacks. Again, there's a lot of other strategies that I talk about in my first book when it comes to anxiety. So long-winded answer there, but I think that covers it.
Absolutely. Rather, it's good to have these kind of distractions, and what works for you better. So better to focus on that. All right. So other thing which everybody talks about when it comes to anxiety and negative thoughts is self-compassion and self-care. So in your experience, how can somebody practice self-compassion and self-care to break free from negative thoughts and overthinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways we've talked about this already, right? So some of it is sort of like getting that broad base of knowledge in understanding how anxiety works, and then being able to take that knowledge and apply it or remind ourselves of it when we are feeling a particular kind of way, right? So the example that I'm going to point at is the one where we talked about with the negativity bias, right? Our brain's proclivity to think about and focus on things that could scare us or hurt us or kill us or something like that. It's like once we understand that is the actual source of our negative thinking, or for the most part it is, right? We are then able to reassure ourselves that, we as people, as individuals, right, with personalities and whatnot, it's like our personalities are probably not the problem. Once we have that reassurance, all of a sudden it's like we're sending those subconscious messages back to our brains and bodies. Our brains and bodies are interpreting those messages and saying, oh, okay, I guess I can turn off the alarms here. And then all of a sudden, like, again, the heart stops racing, the blood stops pumping. And then alongside that, we're like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit calm right now. And because we feel calm, it's this cascade, right? All of a sudden it's like, I feel calm. I don't feel the need necessarily to think such negative thoughts anymore because I don't have these like fear neurotransmitters coursing, through my brain. So I honestly, that is sort of that's the pith of the answer. I almost equate it to like, you go to college when you're 19 years old, 20 years old, whatever, you're taking these like, there's like a core curriculum that you have to follow. And it's like, there's some math, there's some science. And I mean, in high school, it's the same concept, right? But it's like maybe some philosophy, theology, whatever. And as a 19-year-old, you're like, I just want to do X, Y, Z, right? I always want to write, mobile apps, computer code. I want to paint. I want to, go do legal cases or something like that. Like, what is the point of all this introductory knowledge? And eventually I think you grow up and you realize that like, it gives you this base of being able to look at problems and understand things in a particular kind of way. And so it's like the reason why I talk about this stuff in my own books is like, it gives you that base case of knowledge to be able to go back and say like, okay, yeah, sure, there's this one specific strategy that might help me in this situation or whatever. What is better, like what is more advantageous for us is to have a large base of knowledge to be able to say, I understand how this thing works in general. That allows me to look at it in these different fashions. Those perspectives then allow me to change my thoughts, allow me to send subconscious messages to my brain and body, which then, lower the fight or flight response in the moment. So all of that stuff is really important. And I think it's better to have that stuff than to be like, hey, this is the specific one thing that helps you reframe thoughts or something like that, right?
Right. So when it comes to anxiety and overthinking and things like that, people relate, or people keep using phrases about their past experiences or maybe childhood traumas, etc. So, how do our past experience and traumatic events affect our negative thoughts and these overthinking patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this one is probably too long of an answer. Like we could do a podcast series on this, right? And I'm not saying we have to. I'm just saying like it's a long answer. And if you think about it, right, it's like that. This is one of the main reasons why a lot of people go to therapy. There are other reasons as well, right? But it's like a lot of us have things that have happened in our past that have stuck with us. And those become either our triggers or our reminders. Those events are hardwired into our DNA, into our bodies. And they sort of create this new map for us. They create sort of like a new, I guess a map is one way of saying it, but also like they put these glasses on us that change the way that we see the world. And so, if you think about it, right, it's like, have you ever, I guess like sometimes people say like we see the world as we are, not as it is. It's like if we are, if we are constantly thinking about people being devious or people committing crimes or like cheating us, stealing from us, whatever, we may look at people around, we'll have conversations with people and say to ourselves, oh, that guy, totally not a good person, totally like doing skeevy things or whatever. It's like, but that is our mindset, when in reality, like maybe that person was just nervous, right? Maybe they were having a bad day or something like that, but we see them as a product of our own internal filters rather than like who they truly are. And so it's like when we experience trauma, those experiences then stick with us and we have these glasses on, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't want to give too many examples here because they are wide ranging, and also like you get into the personal side of things, and I don't want to use the wrong terms and offend people, right? But if somebody had some great what's the right word? It's like injustice happened to them earlier in their lives. That experience could then become the filter through which they see the world, right? And say their brain, and it's really of no fault of their own. This is how the brain works, is like the brain keeps that memory at the top of its mind, or it's pulling the strings maybe in the shadows without the person even realizing. And everything that person then sees in the future could be a subtle reminder of that event. It could also be like a warning shot to be like, this thing is about to happen again right in front of me, right? It's that same thing as, if I see somebody as untrustworthy, as a product of my own filters, it's like if somebody did something to me as a child or something like that, I may then be suspicious that is about to happen, or those people, whoever I'm looking at, is about to commit that same act to me again in the future. That stuff's really difficult, right? It takes a long time to peel back all those layers, work through that trauma. I think sort of the takeaway that can be important here is to understand that sometimes the triggers and the sources of our negative thoughts, even though evolution has a lot to do with it, like, in psychology, we talk about nurture versus nature. Nature would be the evolutionary psychology side of things. Nurture would be like, what were our experiences? And both of those things play into how we interpret the world and the people that we are. So I guess I can't really give enough information here that would be specific to act on, but I think it is important to know that those experiences, key significant emotional events can stick with us, and they can change the way that we see the world, and they can then become triggers, for future negative emotions, even if they, things that we are going through don't have any direct correlation to the events we experienced in the past.
Absolutely. I think past experiences, obviously, everybody knows that have an impact on you, rather than being unaware of it. Throwing some light on it will make you aware of, okay, this is a trigger point for me. Let me not increase that. So you also touched upon therapy. So my next question is, how can therapy and counseling help us to break free from these negative thinking, or maybe the overthinking, etc.?
Yeah, so if we kind of back up a little bit, right? Like any strategy that we enlist, or any healing modality or journey, like path that we go down, is a way for us to potentially learn more about the subject that we're dealing with, right? So anxiety, depression, something like that. Maybe ourselves, the way that we think, the beliefs that we have, and also some of our experiences and how we make sense of the world, right? So it's like each path that we go down can be beneficial. I think one of the tough things is like figuring out, there's no one size fits all to mental health challenges, right? Right. In terms of like dealing with them, getting ourselves towards healing, whatever. I think we have to figure out like what resonates with us, and also like our personalities and that sort of thing. Like some people like to read, right? And so maybe they find a book or a podcast or an audiobook or something like that. And that can be the sort of kickstart to a healing journey. Maybe somebody on the other hand has, held everything in for a long time. They don't know where else to turn. They don't have friends and family that they feel are supportive enough or something like that. Or maybe they just want to talk to a professional. Like none of this stuff, like there is no right or wrong answer here, right? It's more just like eventually people get to the point where they're like, I need to do something, and they will look for certain different kinds of ways to find them, to get themselves help, right? to try to be a little bit more specific, if we talk about therapy for a moment, right? It's like the beautiful thing about therapy is like, unless you have a really close friend or, a loving parent or something like that, and a lot of us do,
Right.
it can be hard for us, especially in this society, in American society, or even just modern society, right? To really express what it is that we are dealing with, to talk about our traumas, to talk about our shortcomings and whatnot. Therapy gives you a safe space to do that, right? A doctor has taken an oath to help you. They have also taken an oath to, adhere to, client-patient confidentiality, that sort of thing, where it's like, you can be confident that the stories and the thoughts and beliefs that you are going to share with that professional are not going to leave that room, or at the very least, they are going to be obfuscated. Like your name will be left out of it, and the details that would identify you as a person, those details will be left out of future conversations or whatever. So I think therapy can be really beneficial for many reasons. One is it gives us that safe space to be able to talk about some of the things that we are struggling with. The other is that, we are all creatures of habit. And sometimes what we all need, somebody may say, hey, you got to start eating better. Or you got to, go to the gym every day or whatever it is. Sometimes if we don't, even though we have good intentions, if we don't have things on our calendar, like, hey, here's my hour where I go to the gym or whatever, the day can just pass us by and we don't do those things. The nice thing about therapy, and I'm not trying to boil it down into just this. Obviously, there's many great things about therapy, but from a human standpoint, right? It's like, if you have an appointment on your calendar on Tuesday at 5 p.m., guess what? You're going to that appointment, right? So it allows us to schedule time for ourselves. It allows us to schedule time to heal. Whereas let's say we don't decide to go to the therapist and we're like, I'll read that book one day. I definitely will. Guess what? I hate to break it to you, but for most people, 6 months will go by and that book will be sitting on the shelf collecting dust. So there's a lot of great reasons for getting into all these different things. Again, it comes down to figuring out what works for you, right? If you know you're somebody that needs that sort of predictable event on the calendar, something that is scheduled, then therapy can be great. At the same time, right, it's like nothing is without pros and cons. Maybe you book your first appointment with a therapist and you don't resonate with the doctor that they have given you. It's like, okay, maybe you need to go find somebody else. Maybe you also work through a lot of therapists and all of a sudden you say, you know what, this approach isn't working for me. I'm going to go try something else. That's the important, that is, I guess, taking this back to my content, right, is I talk about this notion of a mental health toolkit. The idea is basically, I will throw a lot of different ideas at you. You have to try them on, so to speak, see which ones fit, which ones don't. You take the ones that you like, you put them in your mental health toolkit. And then when you are not feeling like yourself, when you're feeling lousy, you pull out ones that are relevant to the situation in front of you. And, a lot of those strategies, in terms of my books, will be things like distracting ourselves and the 10 steps and yada, yada. But the notion extends and applies to therapy and to medication and all those different sorts of things. It's like, we all need to come up with a custom tailored solution that fits all of our personalities. Otherwise, it's like, we probably won't get to where it is that we're looking to go. We can't really genericize this stuff because it is so personal.
Absolutely. I completely agree. To the point you mentioned that American society still doesn't consider all this as mainstream. It's much worse in this part of the world. Here, parents may not accept that their kid needs to go to a therapist. It is still considered as a taboo in many families, etc. So it's an individual choice, but I highly recommend it to people. And I highly recommend to my friends who have gone through tough times, because I have been there. So I try to help them with whatever I can. Cool. So my next question, I don't know whether it will fit into get out of your head model, because it's about positive affirmations. So how do you think positive affirmations can be used to reprogram our thoughts and break free from negative patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like some of my content has this darkness or almost I don't know what the slightly misanthropic sort of vibe to it at times, right? But that's not to say that there's no positivity in my brand whatsoever. At the end of the day, right, the mission of the brand is to help people overcome anxiety and depression, or at the very least manage it. That is very positive. I think it's more that the means by which we get there are non-traditional, are sort of rainbows and unicorns, so to speak, right?
Right.
But it's like everything that I talk about, I try to make sure is rooted in science and practicality and whatnot. It's like how I'm going to answer this question, right? Is there's the notion in psychology that neurons that fire together wire together. That is basically just the notion that like the more that we think about a specific subject, or the more that we talk about something or feel something, the more we create like, our neurons sort of like we create patterns in our minds where those specific things exist. People sometimes talk about this same notion as like a sledding hill. And like, it's like the more that you go down the same path on the sledding hill, the more the tracks of the sled get carved into the ground, right? So it's like, if I have spent 10 years, thinking about negative things, ruminating over negative things, I have a well-established pattern in my mind, or somebody else does, for that kind of behavior, right? And so it's like, if we're talking about positive affirmations, we can apply the same concept in the notion that it's like, if every single day we speak or incant, or whatever the right word is, positive affirmation to ourselves for an hour, it's like over a long period of time, those neurons are firing together and they are sure as hell wiring together. And so it's like one way or another, we need to create new beliefs for ourselves, turn the negative thought train around, build new, mental routines, whatever. Positive affirmations, especially if they are, something that we engage in regularly, they are a reliable means of doing just that. I think maybe my only criticism would be that like sometimes they can be hard to stick with, right? It's like you go to a seminar, you feel good, you do the affirmation for like 10 minutes for like 1 week or something like that, and then you forget about them. Again, this all comes down to like figure out what works for you, figure out what resonates with you, and then lean into those kinds of strategies. I am absolutely not the kind of person that says, don't do this, don't recite positive affirmations, don't think positively, whatever. It's like, again, it all comes down to what works for you. I do believe that can work for you, but can I guarantee that it's going to work for you? I can't do that. Right. So that's where the experimental part comes in. That's where the piece of you trying things out and seeing what works comes in, and being able to just figure out the best path for your own situation and personality.
Right. Actually, to the topic which you touched upon, I think the studies on neuroplasticity and the mental grooves, I think that is quite positive for all of us who are stuck in this same old habits of negative habits. We know that it's affecting us, but we are unable to change because we think we are like this. With scientists doing a lot of work on neuroplasticity and things like that, it is possible to create new mental grooves, as you mentioned right away. Right. So fantastic. So my final question on this subject before I get to know you better. I had last week I had Bonnie Suri, who is a self-relationship coach, who came on the show to speak about growth mindset. So I started thinking that I knew you were coming this week, so I had to connect it somehow. And then I thought I'll plug in a growth mindset question over here, whether it connects to negative thinking, etc. So can cultivating a growth mindset help us break free from negative thoughts and overthinking? Is it possible?
Yes, I would say most definitely. I do have a chapter on, focusing on growth in the first book. I think the main thing to cover here is like a lot of the times, like, so when you grow, when you expand your capabilities or whatever, that is like inevitably means letting go of old patterns, changing beliefs, cutting some part of ourselves off, right? If it's like, hey, I want to grow into being a public speaker or something like that. It's like, do you know how many people are born to be public speakers? Pretty much zero, right? It's like, we have to cultivate that skill. We have to get on stage and we have to be scared and we have to work ourselves through those emotions. And so it's like, when we are doing things that are sort of set us on this path of growth, we are inevitably, like, it is a guarantee that we are going to face uncertainty, some form of fear, some form of anxiety, whatever it is. If we are able to reframe those feelings and say, look, the fact that I'm feeling anxious right now as I'm going to grow isn't an indication that things are going to go wrong, that I shouldn't be going down this path, whatever. If we're able to adopt a growth mindset and say, like, I'm going to grow, I'm going to try to grow no matter what. And I know that fear and anxiety and all these negative emotions are par for the course. we're much more likely to lean into those kinds of things, right? So
Right.
I guess another specific example, we'll go back to the job interview. It's like, if I am going on a job interview next week and I am scared about going on that interview, I would say when I was 18, if I was in that situation, I'd say, because I'm scared, this means it's going to go poorly. And I think I might like cancel this job interview or something like that. If we're able to adopt a growth mindset and say, you know what, I'm going to this job interview no matter what, because I'm going to learn something from it. I'm going to take something away from the experience, and the feelings that I'm enduring right now, they don't have any indication as to they don't provide any indication as to how this situation is going to go. They're just par for the course. We're much more likely, to pick up those experiences and get on with them.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, I think we can do, we should definitely do another session on get out of your head methods, actually, because I'll try to set it up later sometime, because
Cool.
The answers you are given are it cannot be done in an hour's time. We need to specifically focus on that. So before I leave you for the day, I want to talk about a little bit about Brian, a little bit about get out of your head. How did that journey start, and some of the accomplishments, and you are a programmer as well, so some personal aspects as well. So if you can share some insights on that.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't write the first book until 2017, but the journey started a long time before that. I was dealing with anxiety in high school. I had my first panic attack senior year of high school, had a second one freshman year of college. And I talk about both of those experiences in my first book. They really put me on the path of being like, I need to figure out what it is that I'm dealing with. I need to find ways to cope with what it is that I'm dealing with. And, throughout this conversation, right, we've talked about these things very matter-of-factly and whatnot. I hope that I don't give the vibe that it's like, oh, Brian has mastered these things and he doesn't experience any of this. Like he's whatever, he's a guru, whatever, right? It's like, I am still human. I still experience these things. What I have really done is I have reframed a lot of the emotions. So that way the sort of cascading effects of the anxiety, they just don't come into play nearly as much as they used to. But, is there a world in which it's like we vanquish anxiety and depression from our lives entirely for all of time? Probably not, right? We are human, right? I want to make sure that I put that out there. But so it's like when I was 17, when I was 18, I didn't even know what I was dealing with, right? It's like I just knew that I felt really terrible all the time. And I was going on dates with women that I was interested in. I was getting these panic attacks, and it was like, oh my goodness, if I want to find myself in a relationship, which I do want to do, I need to figure out this demon inside of me, right? And so that was sort of the entry point into the journey. Obviously, there's a lot of twists and turns. There's other kinds of negative events that you go through, traumas and experiences that scared me and stuff like that. And I tried my best throughout the time to look at all of those events and say, how can I reframe these things? How can I see them in different lights? Not just for myself, but eventually one day, take this information and share my insights with people, right? And being able to help them with their own anxiety, with their own depression. That was always a goal of mine. It took longer than I think maybe I wanted it to, or something like that. But I eventually, as I alluded to, I eventually wrote the book in 2017. I wrote a second one in 2021 on depression. The journey continues, right? It's like you never know what life is going to throw at you. You try to be as resilient as you can and build up as many methodologies and strategies as you can. I obviously, you'll see some of my writings, I bring the software development side of things into the conversation, just because it's something that I spend a lot of time with. And so it influences the way that I see the world and think about it. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like I'm on a mental health journey myself. Right now, things are going great. And it's like they've been going well for a while, but it's taken a lot of work. And I think for a lot of folks, that will probably be the same case. But I don't know. I am so passionate about this space because it has affected me so much throughout my life. And I see the pain it can create in other people. And I don't know if I'd necessarily say I'm an empath, but somewhere on that vibe, right? And it's like, I don't like to see that pain in other people. And I want to try to help them as best I can, because I know what that specific journey is like. Maybe not each specific scenario or whatever, but a lot of them. And I can really resonate with it. So that's my goal.
Right. Fantastic. I'm pretty sure you're changing a lot of lives, Brian, knowingly, unknowingly. Thank you for your books. I'll get a copy myself this weekend. And I will obviously go through your toolkit for myself. And I'll share my thoughts on that. Thank you so much for taking time out. I loved meeting you, and I hope to continue, interacting with you more in the future.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much for having me. Would be happy to do another session in the future.
Absolutely.
So yeah, let's keep in
Absolutely.
touch.
Take care. Take
All
care.
right,
Bye.
take care.
All right. So that was Brian. Let me change my banner. Right. So that was Brian Sachetta. Check out his website, his blog, getoutofyourhead.com. People who have gone through, mental health issues, etc., have much better actionable tips for people who might go through or who are going through them. So check out his book, etc. Get his book. So that's the episode number 56. Episode 57 will be on Feb 2nd, and I have a US Army sergeant coming on the show who is one of the top public relation experts in the US. So let's hear from him about how to do PR on a budget, how to get more exposure to your brand, etc. So I can't wait to meet him next week. He's one of my personal favorite people. See you all next week. Take care, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you.